Hello, I don't usually do a story on a Sunday, I usually do a religious reflection. But I found this story written by Michael Morpurgo, who's a brilliant writer. It is aimed at a younger audience, but I think it works for adults too. It's going to be quite long, so I recommend that you sit back, find somewhere comfortable, pause this whilst you do that, and then come back and enjoy a story for the 1st century by Michael Morpurgo called In Ancient Time. I found it in this anthology called Centuries of Stories, and it is just amazing. It's a what might have been. I wonder if he was listening to Jerusalem when he sort of started wondering about what might have happened if those feet had trodden in England's green and pleasant land. And that's all I'm going to tell you about this story until we start it, which is now. In ancient time. When I was young we heard it often, all of us in the village did, but whenever the old man began his story again we listened rapt all the same. He was blind in his last years, but every time he told the story his eyes blazed as if he was seeing it happen in front of him as he spoke. He finished always with the words, "See, he's here! He's with us now!" And he would point over our heads into the smoky darkness beyond the fire. Time and again I would find myself turning round to look, and I wasn't the only one. Like the wind through the trees before the rain, we always knew when the story was coming. He would wait for a silence round the fire, lean forward, warming his hands, and begin. In ancient time, before any of you were ever born, I was a young man. No cursed Roman soldier had yet set foot in this land of ours. We were not then a beaten people. We were wild, perhaps, quarrelsome certainly, but we were our own people. My mother died in giving birth to me, and my beloved father fed me, taught me, and protected me. Wherever I went, I walked in his steps. He was a god to me. Then, one day, whilst I was still only a small boy, he went off hunting in the forest with his brother, my uncle, and did not return. He'd been attacked by a bear and taken off. Not a bone was ever found of him. That was what they told me. My uncle, who had no children of his own, took me in and at once treated me as his slave. I gathered his firewood for him. I set his traps. I skinned his deer. I ground his corn. He was a giant of a man with arms like tree trunks and the neck of a bull, and he had a raging temper too. It was not until I was nearly a man myself that I at last found the courage to stand up to him, to protest at how I'd been used all these years. "You whining wretch," he cried, "have I not fed you, clothed you, kept you warm through the winters?" And in his fury he took a great staff and beat me to the ground. Blow upon blow he rained down on me. I curled up like a hedgehog to protect myself. I would have stayed there cowering in the dirt, but as he struck me, he began to shout at me, a vicious curse with each blow, with each kick, and then after the curses came these terrible words. "I killed your miserable father, kicked him to death in the woods till there was no breath left in him. Like you, he too turned on me and enraged me. Like this I killed him, and this, and this, and then left him to the bears and wolves. So I will leave you. Your blood shall join his blood." Vengeance gave me all the strength I needed. With a scream of anger I rose up and tore the staff from his grasp. I struck him about the body, about the head, until he fell on his knees and begged me to stop. But I did not stop until he was stretched out lifeless at my feet. I ran then, stumbling into the forest, knowing full well that after what I had done I would never see my childhood friends again, nor ever return to my village, that I would wander an outcast forever, alone all my life, a killer man, a cursed man. I went west towards the setting sun, and after many weeks found myself high on a wind-swept moor, in amongst the sacred mounds where great chieftains lie buried, the sea about me on both sides. It was a darkening winter's evening. The howling cold bit into my bones and froze my spirits. For some days I'd had little or nothing to eat, and no shelter either. I was a lost man, filled with remorse at my terrible crime, with nowhere to lay my head, and no one to comfort me. I saw no hope, no end to my suffering. I wandered wailing in my misery through the high bracken that whipped me about the face, and the grasping gorse that ripped at my clothes and at my flesh beneath, until at last I came to the edge of a towering cliff, with the sea surging far below me. Here, I thought, here I shall end my life, for it is not worth the living. I would be resolute, I would be brave. I stepped forward, but found that I could not jump, that my legs would simply not obey me. I felt a sudden hand on my shoulder. "Friend," said a voice. I turned. He was a man still young, but older than I was, taller too, and with a darker skin. He had eyes that looked into my very soul. "Come," he said, and putting his arm around my shoulders, he led me away from the cliff edge. I found I had neither the will nor the power to resist him. "You need food. You need warmth. You shall stay with my uncle and me," he said. "We live close by. It's not much of a place to live, but it is out of the rain, out of the mists. We have a warming fire, and there'll be food enough and plenty for another one. Come." So they took me in. He called himself Jesus of Nazareth, and his old uncle I came to know as Joseph of Arimathea. I had heard of neither place. They were travellers, they told me, who'd come from an eastern land across the sea. They'd come as far west as they could, and were working in a tin mine nearby. It would be hard work, they said, but they could always do with help, with another strong back, another pair of hands. So for a winter, a spring and a summer, the three of us lived together, and side by side hammered and hewed in the tin mine. My spirits were restored, and my strength too. I lacked for nothing: food, water, shelter, and most welcome of all, human companionship. There was often silence between us, but it was the silence of friends at ease with one another. Jesus and Joseph seemed often deep in meditation and prayer, and more I found myself drawn into their ways. When they did talk, they spoke of such wonders, such places and people, as I could never have imagined. From them I first heard of the Romans, who already ruled their country and much of the rest of the world too, it seemed. It was a rare and wonderful thing, they said, to come to a place where the Romans did not rule. They had been as far east as they had west on a great voyage of discovery. They talked of mountains as high as the sky itself, of great temples in the clouds of the east, of wise men and visionaries they had encountered in their travels. But most often they told me of their God, a God so powerful that he would one day prove stronger than even the mighty Romans themselves, and yet at the same time a merciful God who loved us and forgave us when we did wrong. I listened in wonder to all of this. Jesus was a man I had to listen to, I wanted to listen to, and in time I began to ask questions, for there was much I did not understand. Who is this God you speak of? Where is he? Where will I find him? He is in me, Jesus replied. He is in my uncle Joseph, and he is in you too. He is in all of us, if we want him to be. In all this time, neither Jesus nor his uncle Joseph ever asked why I'd come there, or how it was that I had been found in so wretched a state, ready even to kill myself. We were sitting silent round the fire one autumn evening. I was filled with remorse, as I always was when contemplating my dreadful crime. I looked up and found them both watching me. There was no accusation in their eyes, only a tenderness, an understanding that moved me at last to speak out and tell them my story. When I had done, Jesus reached out and put his hand on mine. "Go home, where you belong," he said. "Your uncle lives, I tell you. He is not dead." He spoke with such certainty. "We will go together, for the time has come when my uncle and I too must go home where we belong. We have wandered long enough in this wilderness. I have God's work to do, and I can wait no longer." So early one morning, with the autumn mist still shrouding the valleys, we set off together. The closer we came to my village, the more I worried how I might be received, and the more I began to doubt Jesus' assurances that I would still find my uncle alive. We parted by the river below the village, in the shadow of the great alder trees where the salmon lie low in the pools. I was fearful and reluctant to leave my companions. I urged them to accompany me into my village. "Go alone, friend," Jesus whispered as he embraced me. "All shall be well. If you ever need us, come to Palestine. You'll find us easily enough," said Joseph, and they left me to find my own way. It was as Jesus had said. My uncle was indeed alive. More than that, he was a changed man, utterly changed. He fell on his knees at once, begging me for forgiveness, before the whole village. I could see that he meant it, that all the fury and cruelty had gone out of him. I forgave him readily, knowing only too well what agony of remorse he had been through. There was a great feasting and rejoicing that night, for I had long been supposed dead. But despite all my uncle's kindnesses to me, he treated me with great affection after my return, like a long-lost son. I found myself restless, no longer content to stay all my life in the village. I longed to go to Palestine, to be with Jesus and Joseph again. So after only 3 summers at home, I set off on my own voyage of discovery. I travelled over the sea into Gaul, to Rome itself, and then by ship again to Egypt, and across the desert at last to Palestine. The closer I came, the more I heard of Jesus of Nazareth, how his words touched the hearts of the people, of the poor and the downtrodden, how he had given hope when there was none. Some said he made miracles. Some were calling him the Messiah. Some said he would set them free and drive the Romans from their land forever. He was on his way to Jerusalem, they said. So I went at once to Jerusalem to meet him. There were very few people about. I asked after him in the marketplace. They just laughed at me and told me I'd better hurry. "Why?" I asked. "Why do you think there's hardly anyone here in the market? Always the same when they crucify someone. Half the city goes to watch. Ruins our trade. It's all his fault, that Jesus of Nazareth. It's him they're crucifying, him and a couple of thieves." "Where?" I could scarcely find my voice. "Golgotha," they told me, and pointed up the hill, outside the city walls. "Just follow the crowd." So I did. I joined the surge of the crowd as they packed the narrow streets, pushing and jostling my way through, until at last I found him. He was staggering under the weight of his cross. Roman guards whipping him on like a donkey as he went. Someone had pressed a cruel crown of thorns onto his head, and his face was running with blood. Our eyes met, and he knew me at once. He smiled through his pain. "All shall be well, friend," he said. Swept along by the crowd, I followed. I was there when they nailed him to his cross and raised him high. Those same accursed Romans that now infest every corner of our land stood there and mocked him in his agony. But Jesus shouted no curses at them. He simply said, "Father, forgive them. Father, forgive them." He took all night to die. In the cold grey of dawn, as I sat huddled under my cloak, my eyes filled with tears of anger, tears of grief, I felt a hand on my shoulder. "Come, friend, we've seen enough. Come away." It was his uncle Joseph. Joseph of Arimathea. We left Jerusalem that same morning. It was not safe to stay. Every one of Jesus' friends was being sought out and hunted down. In fear of our lives, we moved from village to village, travelling only by night and hiding by day. One day, hiding out in the dark depths of a mountain cave, he showed me the cup for the first time. This cup, he told me, is the very cup Jesus drank from at the Last Supper he ate with his friends. I shall hide it somewhere where it will be safe forever. Joseph was very old and frail by now, and I knew he could not keep running for much longer. Let's go home, Joseph, I said. Let's go back to my land, my village. There are no Romans there. We'll be safe. The cup will be safe. He was too exhausted to argue. The journey home was long and arduous, so it was nearly winter before we came home at last. And for one short autumn we lived there together, Joseph and I, here in my uncle's house. Never a day went by that we did not speak of Jesus. We drank from his cup every evening at supper. It was one way we could feel close to him. To both of us the world seemed such an empty place without him. Sometimes Joseph liked to walk up the Tor at Glastonbury to watch the sunset. He found the climb hard and often had to lean heavily on his staff. We were up there at the top one evening as the world went dark around us. "Bury me here on this hill, friend," he said, "with Jesus' cup beside me. He is here with us now. Can you feel him?" And I could. When the time came, I did as he had asked me. I laid him in the soft earth of Glastonbury Tor, set the cup from the Last Supper in his hands and filled his grave. As I walked away, I drove his staff into the ground and left it there. I did not go back until the snows came. At the very place I had left his staff, there now grew a hawthorn tree, covered in white blossom. It is there to this day. Blind as I am, I can see it now as I can see Jesus. See, he is here. He's with us now. The old man died many long years ago, and I myself am now as old as he was. The Romans are still here, but one day they will be gone and we shall be our own people again. The hawthorn tree still blossoms on Glastonbury Tor in the depths of every winter, and rest assured it always will. Now it is I who sit by the fire and tell the old man's story to the young ones. Each time I tell it, I feel as if I am passing on something precious, more precious even than the cup that still lies buried somewhere on Glastonbury Tor. The end.